Hello, my name is Emily Hanna and I'm the lead archivist collection discovery at New South Wales State Archives. Today I'm going to talk to you about records in our collection that relate to Norfolk Island. But before I start, I'll read the Acknowledgement of Country. I acknowledge First Nations peoples of the various lands on which we meet. I acknowledge First Nations peoples as keepers of languages and cultures that enrich our connection to country. As the oldest knowledge holders and first record holders and archivists of cultural heritage connected to the lands we live and work on today, I extend this respect to all First Nations peoples and elders past and present. Today I'm going to talk about the records of Norfolk Island that are held in the State Archives collection. So at New South Wales State Archives, we hold records created and kept by the New South Wales colonial government and later the New South Wales state government. We don't hold private papers or diaries. Records from other states, including the records of Tasmanian state government or Commonwealth government records. We tend to think about records in their historical context, and for Norfolk Island, this means in the 3 settlements of that land. So the first settlement of Norfolk covered the years 1788 to 1814. This was considered at the time to be an extension of the penal settlement of New South Wales. The island had resources such as flax and timber, which were needed by the British Navy for shipbuilding and clothing, and it was uninhabited. The flax industry was later abandoned when it was realised that they didn't have the necessary skills on the island, and pine timber wasn't resilient enough for Navy ship masts. Difficulties in communication and provisioning led to the evacuation of the island in 1814. Most of our records from this early period come to us from the Secretary to the Governor, later the Colonial Secretary. The Colonial Secretary was a central figure in government at the time. Most matters in the colony in the 19th century passed through this office. The big picture records, which provide the legal basis for Norfolk and the tone of how it was run, were often kept in the Colonial Secretary's office. One of Norfolk Island's foundational documents is the Charter of Justice, 1795, which established the Court of Criminal Jurisdiction on the island. The court was set up to overcome the difficulties of transporting prisoners between Norfolk and Sydney for trial, and consisted of a judge advocate and 4 officers of the Navy or the military. Instructions to the commandants also tell us a lot about what was expected from them and how the island was to be administered. Governor Philip Gidley King appointed Major Joseph Foveaux as Commandant of the island in 1800. This is a copy of the instructions from King to Foveaux, signed by King as a true copy of the original, and you can see Philip Gidley King's signature there on the screen. Foveaux's instructions were wide-ranging, touching on topics such as the general administration of the island, the commissariat, preservation of the livestock, products of public labour, manufacture of cloth from flax, salting of pork, convict servants for officers, the commissariat administration, importation of spirits, the granting of land, reservation of land for public purposes, religious observation, the creation of a fund for school purposes, and boat building. Foveaux was an able administrator and concentrated on building up the island station, which had become run down. Under Foveaux's command, however, the convicts there suffered great cruelty. There are several maps and plans of Norfolk Island in our collection. Here we see an early plan of the town of Sydney, which was later called Kingston, drawn by Charles Grimes. He was Deputy Surveyor General at Norfolk from 1790 and Head Constable from 1792. We also have records that tell us about life on Norfolk Island in this first period. Many come to us as returns or lists of various kinds. We're lucky enough to have victualling books from the years of the first settlement. The earliest victualling book, dated 1792 to 96, is held at the State Library of New South Wales, and we have a copy in our reading room. These tells us the names of all people, whatever their status on Norfolk Island, and the number of days they were supplied with food rations from the commissariat. The victualling book page you see here on the left lists male convicts and dates from 1804. On the right is a list of rations issued between July and December 1804, right from the non-commissioned officers down to children under 2 years of age. If you look closely, you'll see that pork and flour feature heavily. And if you look really closely down the bottom, you'll see that women and children above 10 years of age were given 2/3 of the above rations. Women and children above 2 years of age were given half, and children under the age of 2 were given a quarter of the rations of an adult. Returns also tell us things like work performed by convicts on the island, payments for goods supplied to colonial authorities, buildings and property of residents, and so on. Later, lists were drawn up to help plan the evacuation of the island, and these included lists of the buildings and property owned by the settlers, and so on. Official correspondence tells us in more detail about the people on the island. The letter on the right here reports the murder of a prisoner, William Marr, by John Shea, who was a private. John Shea was sent back to Sydney and tried before the Court of Criminal Jurisdiction. Shea was sentenced to death, although this was later commuted to life as a convict. The document on the left is a sick certificate signed by the surgeon John Connellan in January 1811. It indicated that the superintendent, John Best, was nearly blind in one eye and unable to perform his duties any longer. The letter reporting the murder also reports that John Best was granted leave with his housekeeper, who was called Rebecca Chippenham, and Mary Wheeler, a child, to proceed to headquarters for his recovery. As early as 1794, some officials had started to think about abandoning Norfolk Island. Although the settlers were reluctant to move from the area, the island, the settlement had steadily reduced over the years. A partial withdrawal from the island in 1804 sent some settlers to Port Dalrymple, which is now known as Georgetown in Tasmania. Here we see a government order from 1805 informing any settler who held a land grant that they could swap their land grant for one at Port Dalrymple or Hobart Town, and they would receive 4 acres for every one held at Norfolk Island. An 1806 government order pointed out the advantages of Port Dalrymple for settlers, the agriculture, the pasturage, fresh water, and the excellent harbours and rivers. Although there was reluctance to move from the island, one of Governor Macquarie's first actions in 1811 was to order abandonment of the island. This commenced in 1813 and the island was finally deserted in 1814. The second settlement, 1825 to 1853. After 1814, the island was left unoccupied until 1825. In 1824, the Colonial Office decided to revive the penal settlement on Norfolk Island as a place of banishment for convicts who had reoffended in the colony. On the 6th of June 1825, Major Turton, with 34 troops, 6 women and children, and 57 convicts, reoccupied the island. In this period, again, we turn to the Colonial Secretary's records, and we are lucky enough to have copies of the letters that were sent to the establishment, as well as those received, and occasionally those whose lives were dominated by it. In the first instructions to Major Turton, we see the intent of the colonial authorities for Norfolk Island. The object of forming the establishment at Norfolk was to provide a place of security, subsistence, and hard labour for convicts of the worst description. Turton was ordered to land safely, select a site with fresh water, and begin constructing huts for soldiers and convicts. And you can see there is a bit of detail there telling us that the troops' huts were to be placed 300 yards away from the other huts, and that The troops' huts would also be enclosed by a strong palisade and a ditch to secure them from assault. I think there were no illusions there. Here we see a plan of the convict barracks from 1838. Very well thought out and very well established. Again, we see authorities sending returns back to the Colonial Secretary about aspects of the convict system on Norfolk Island. It is possible to glean a lot of information about who was on the island and what was happening to them. This is a return of convicts showing their period of service and behaviour, and we can see a range of different punishments inflicted, and this return dates from 1829. So if we look closely, we can see a Thomas O'Hara from the Castle Forbes. He was sentenced to 1 year and 8 months and had also been sent to the jail gang for 6 days and to have bread and water during that time for idleness and insolence. We see an entry further down on this side of the page from John Hayden, who came to New South Wales on the Minerva. He had 1 year and a month at Norfolk. He was given 25 lashes for absenting himself from work. He also got 10 days on the jail gang for robbing prisoners' gardens, 7 days for concealing a hoe, and 3 months jail gang for stealing potatoes. So stealing food was a big deal by the looks of things there. And so on the left-hand side of the screen, the convicts are those with 1 and 2 year sentences. And then on the right-hand side, it's those with 14-year sentences. So we see Jack Covey on the Castlereagh. He's been given quite a few different punishments there. He's got 25 lashes for taking tools in camp, 25 lashes for insolence, another 12 for insolence, 18 for idleness, 25 for idleness and insolence, 50 lashes for neglecting his work, and then 50 for refusing to work. We also have returns for a range of other reasons that were regularly sent back to New South Wales. Things like work performed for the government and private individuals, punishments, trials, lists of public buildings, people who were sent back to Sydney and later back to Van Diemen's Land, a list of the horses in government service, and births, illnesses and deaths. We also hear the voices of the convicts from time to time in the petitions that were sent to the Colonial Secretary. This petition is from Daniel Hanlon, who arrived in New South Wales on the Governor-Ready. Some years later, he's convicted at Maitland by the Supreme Court for uttering a forged order worth £3 and sentenced to transportation for life. On Norfolk Island, he occupies a position of trust as the overseer of the prisoners' rations and is seeking a commutation of his sentence. Governor Gibbs refers this back to the Commandant at Norfolk Island. So if you read the text of the letter, he gives us some details about his past and his always good behaviour. He's petitioning for a shorter sentence, and the governor notes, if you read over on the right, the left-hand side in the left-hand margin there, he writes that there is nothing in the Act of Council to preclude this man from being sent to Sydney for commutation of sentence under the Act. He has served the specified time either as a convict for life or for his commuted sentence of 7 years. This must be for the Commandant of Norfolk Island, and then the initials GG, which means George Gibbs. So very interesting document to see there, and always read the annotations because they can tell you what happens next in the matter. And occasionally, often through the paperwork created for the courts, really detailed pictures of convicts have come down to us. These documents outline the life of Francis McManus, who was originally convicted in Glasgow in 1831 for stealing. In Hobart, he was found guilty of assault with intent to murder and transported to Norfolk Island in 1837. In 1844, he is up again for attempted murder. In the paperwork about this incident, we have, the most amazingly for New South Wales, a copy of his police history, both from Van Diemen's Land and Norfolk Island. We also have a lengthy character sketch of McManus, which provides detail about his family background. So you can see his colonial convictions and his history at Norfolk Island there on the left, all the different numbers of lashes and his bad behaviour there. And then on the right, we get a sketch of the life of Francis McManus. And the first page really talks about where he was born and his father. So saying he was born in Edinburgh, where his parents, who were Irish, had settled early in life. His father at one time enjoyed a considerable salary as a teacher in a Catholic school. But the loose habits of his wife and the shocking depravity of his children were the causes of his removal from this situation, and it appears that afterwards he obtained a miserable living by acts of forgery and swindling. And so it goes on. So it gives you the impression that it was only a matter of time before his son, Francis McManus, ended up on Norfolk Island being charged with murder. McManus did eventually go back to Tasmania, where he was finally executed in 1853. The records can tell us about those that ran the system, both their private and their public lives. On the left in these documents is a glimpse into the private life of Captain McConaughey, who was appointed Commandant in 1840. He is asking the Colonial Secretary for an advance of £200 to defray the expenses of relocating from Van Diemen's Land to Norfolk Island with his family. We hold several memoranda from McConaughey, who is generally regarded as treating convicts more humanely. On the right, he wrote about the need for a formation of a library on Norfolk Island. During McConaughey's time, for the first time, convicts were transported directly to Norfolk Island from England. Governor Gipps was instructed from England not to send second-time offenders to Norfolk. By 1843, the convict population was decreasing so rapidly that Governor Gipps doubted whether Norfolk Island could keep supporting itself. Second-time offenders had ceased to be sent there in 1840, and the transportation of convicts to New South Wales had all but ceased. This came to an end in 1844, when Major Childs took over the position of Commandant from McConaughey. His instructions represent a return to Norfolk as a place of severe punishment, and the island regained its reputation for brutality, which it retained until the penal settlement was finally closed in 1853. On the 14th of September 1844, the administrative control of Norfolk Island passed from New South Wales to Van Diemen's Land. During this time, the island regained its reputation for brutality, which it retained until the penal settlement was closed in 1853. So just some of the quotes there in the Major Child's instructions: the system of management to be rigorous, no remission of punishment or relaxation is to be allowed, severe unremitted labour is to be the lot of all prisoners without distinction or exception at Norfolk Island. You see some of the photographs of Norfolk Island throughout this presentation. These are part of our collection of photographs from the Government Printing Office. Here you can see Bloody Bridge. This was built during the second settlement by convict labour to ensure that a route over the stream, even when the stream was in flood. The reason for its name is unclear, but is thought to be based on a story about the death of a convict work gang overseer. During the building of the bridge, a work gang murdered their overseer and walled him up in the bridge. The next day, the replacement overseer saw blood oozing from the mortar. After 1856, the Pitcairn Islanders, who were descendants of the Bounty mutinies, were resettled on Norfolk Island by the British government. Norfolk Island, which had formed part of New South Wales and then Tasmania, became a distinct settlement of the British Crown under the administration of the Governor of New South Wales. On the 1st of July 1914, Norfolk Island became an Australian territory under the Commonwealth Government. Since 1979, The island has been governed under the provisions of the Commonwealth Norfolk Island Act 1979, which established a legislative assembly and granted a significant degree of self-government. Unlike in earlier periods, we have significant records from other offices than the Colonial Secretary, including the Governor's Office and other agencies. The Governor's Norfolk Island papers cover the years 1852 to 1893. They are a miscellaneous collection of correspondence and receipts dealing with everything from the reduction of the penal establishment, the transfer of the Pitcairn Islanders to Norfolk, ecclesiastical jurisdiction over the island, and the establishment of a Melanesian school, various descriptions of the island's history and trade, governor's visits, laws and regulations, land grants, other land matters, health reports, the importation of skilled artisans, a survey of the island, public accounts, the island's investments with the Oriental Bank Corporation, the state of the buildings and agriculture, the supply of stores, and the payment of salaries. Here on the left, you see Lieutenant Gregory's narrative of the voyage to Pitcairn Island and then to Norfolk Island to convey immigrants in 1856. So it tells us all about the weather and that it went quite well, the dates that he arrived at Pitcairn, and then they packed everyone up and moved them over to Norfolk Island, and it all went really well. And he says, our proceedings herewith have been attended with great success. We have brought the whole community away and landed them all on this island. Also included in the Governor's papers are descriptions of the buildings that were left on Norfolk Island. Here, for example, we have a description of Government House, including the outbuildings and the cottages as well. So it tells us that Government House was a stone building consisting of 8 rooms, 1 kitchen, storerooms, a loft over the storeroom, a pantry, a water closet, and 2 cellars. And there we can see a beautiful picture of the old Government House on Norfolk Island. The records also include a number of returns of births, deaths, and marriages, such as this one. These tell us on the left all the deaths of the Norfolk Islanders since their arrival in 1856 down to 1865. And if you look closely, that you'll see there's a lot of children listed there and some very young children as well, 9 days, 7 days, and so on. And then we've got some older people listed as well, some adults and older children. All the names are interesting. You see lots of people with surnames like Adams and Christian, Quintal, Buffett, McCoy, Taylor, and so on. And then on the right-hand side, we've got a list of marriages in Norfolk Island between 1856 and 1870. The Governor's papers also include letters such as this one from George Nobbs to the New South Wales Governor Earl Belmore. These are often surprisingly intimate letters, giving small and large details of the settlement, how it's operating, and the inhabitants. As a bit of background, George Nobbs started as an unordained minister at Pitcairn Island and later became the leader of that community. He was ordained in London at some stage and then relocated with the islanders to Norfolk Island, where he continued to represent the community. Here we see one of his letters. So it tells us that it's a very chatty and intimate letter, thanking the governor for the arrival of medicines, describing one lady's death. She was 33 years old and died from congestion of the lungs. She had 6 children and she was a widow, her husband having died during the epidemic 2 years before. But the children will, humanly speaking, be well cared for. They were committed by their expiring mother to the care of their paternal grandfather, a man still in the prime of his life, and he will surely redeem his promise. It also gives us an update on Bishop Patterson, who was unwell and had to be sent to Auckland to be looked after by some qualified doctors, and his health was improving. And then a little note just to say that they're going on very comfortably and quietly, exporting a few cattle to New Caledonia, supplying whale ships with vegetables, and the proceeds of their own whaling establishments are enabled to procure all that is usually necessary for domestic comfort. So telling us about their existence and that they have everything that they need. And here we see a picture of Mr. Nobbs's house. So this is where his children would have grown up and his family would have come back to. Here we see a document from a school file. So this is a school file about Norfolk Island, and school files commonly were kept by the Department of Education and contain documentation about individual public schools throughout New South Wales. They start in 1876 and go up to 1979. And the sort of correspondence you might see there might be to do with the establishment of a school, about selecting the school site, building the school buildings, engaging teachers to teach at the school, dealing with the teachers travelling to the school, inspectors' reports about the school, and all sorts of documentation, including details of some of the children that attended, complaints by parents, and so on and so forth. So very informative about the whole community. Here, one of the documents in the Norfolk Island school file is a Norfolk Island census return to the end of December 1896. It lists all the families there at the time, all the names of each family and their ages. So we've got the Adams, the Buffetts, the Christians, the Quintals, the Nobbs, and the Evanses, and so on, all the people there. And then on the right-hand side here, we've got a photograph of Norfolk Island Public School. So I wonder how many of the people in that photograph were listed in the Norfolk Island returns there. Unfortunately, the photograph's not dated. This school file also includes inspectors' reports and reports from teachers about what was taught in the school. We're also extremely lucky to have some exam papers from students in 1908. Here we see Holman Christian's English exam paper, where he's writing on the left-hand side about the happiest day in his life in beautiful penmanship. And then on the right, he's answering some questions. Whilst Holman was busy at school, there were bigger things going on at Norfolk. After Federation in 1901, it was felt that the island was disadvantaged by being a Crown colony and would be better served under the Commonwealth of Australia. Governor Harry Rawson wrote about the reasons why this would be the case during a visit he made to the island. He was writing to Lord Tennyson, the administrator of the Commonwealth Government, in 1902. And he states that the item is very beautiful. You can grow anything, but out of the 5,400 acres there were only about 270 under cultivation, which he thought was due to some of the laws, and also for want of means to ship their produce to Australia. And so he outlines some problems, including the local postal service, which was in a disgraceful state, the call of steamers carrying the mails, which were uncertain, sometimes passed without dropping in because of the weather, which meant that there was loss of perishable exports waiting to be sent because obviously the ships weren't there to pick it up. The Commonwealth tariff duty on the Norfolk Island produce, which will ruin the islanders, and the Volunteer Defence Force should be arranged under the federal government. And so for these and a couple of other reasons, he came to the conclusion that for the benefit of the island and the general good, it ought to be annexed to Australia. And he writes this in 1902. In 1903, a Royal Commission of Inquiry was instituted into Norfolk Island affairs. It looked at various matters affecting the island. These included the best means of securing increased production of the most suitable exports and shipping facilities, certain cases of illegal occupation of Crown lands, the occupation of government buildings, the effect of the law preventing the seizure of land for debt, and landing places. Evidence was also taken relating to the commodities the island was best adapted to producing and the best means of exterminating noxious weeds. This type document comes from the report of the Commission. This page is evidence deposed by Oliver Macy Quintal, who had been a Pitcairn Islander. And if we look on the left-hand side there, he's describing his land and how he had been improving it, so fencing with wire, and then further improvements that had been made from therein. And then secondly, he also includes a little biographical section about himself. So he tells us he was born on Pitcairn Island and went to Norfolk in 1856. And then in 1859, he went to New Zealand and stayed there until 1894. Then he and his wife and family left Auckland, arriving back in Norfolk in 1895. And then sort of talking about how he went on to get his land and those sorts of things. So quite interesting to get that background and detail about just one of the residents. And throughout this volume, there is similar information about other residents as well. So very, very exciting. Now, not everyone was happy about the idea of becoming part of Australia. There are several petitions to the King from islanders protesting that they wish to remain a Crown colony throughout the early 1900s. To no avail. In 1914, Norfolk Island became an Australian territory under the Commonwealth Government. And here we see one of the petitions that was sent by the Norfolk Islanders asking for this not to happen. So this petition is signed by various Quintals, John Young, Howard Christian, and the Secretary J. Edward Stoke. And it's nice to see the X mark of John Quintal Sr., who was aged 86 at the time. We also hold typical records such as deceased estate files and probate packets from Norfolk Islanders. These are created after someone has passed away. The deceased estate file is the record of the death duty calculated on an estate and lists everything a person owns at the time of their death, from real estate to personal property and household effects such as furniture and jewellery. Probate packets include the will of the deceased and have all the paperwork the Supreme Court requires to validate the will and executor of the estate. Here we see the probate packet for young Buffett Quintal, who died in World War I in 1917. On the right-hand side there, we see the statement from the AIF certifying that he had been killed in action and the date and where it had been sent out by. And then on the left there, we've got the will for young Buffett Quintal, saying who he's left his estate to. And that person was also living on Norfolk Island. The final record I'll show you today are photographs from albums from the Department of Main Roads during World War II. These albums contain photographs of the construction of the aerodrome on Norfolk Island during the war. Construction was undertaken by the New South Wales Government for the United States Army Air Force and took place between August 1942 and February 1943 in association with the United States Engineers Department, United States Army. They document the lows, such as the day that the Caterpillar tractor fell in the sea at the Cascade after slipping from a barge, although the DMR is quite clear to point out that it was not under DMR control at the time, and this happened during a heavy surge. And then the highs, such as the day the first plane landed on the aerodrome, which was Christmas Day, 1942, and it brought mail. And then another plane dropped food in parachutes for the New Zealand troops. And the food was lamb, green peas, and potatoes for their Christmas dinner, which is a really nice touch and a wonderful detail to know. So how do you find the records? Well, start by checking the Museums of History New South Wales website. From here, we'll look at subjects A to Z, which is where we list all of our research topic guides, indexes and webinars for the State Archives collection, and we can also check the State Archives catalogue. So if we start with the MHNSW homepage, you've got a couple of options. You could click on the menu button there on the top right-hand corner, or on the collections button in the centre of the screen. If you click on the menu button, click on the option for collections and then State Archives collection. You can click on Subjects A to Z to go straight to Subjects A to Z, or State Archives catalogue to go straight to the catalogue. But for this example, we'll click on State Archives collection. That button will take you to the State Archives collection page. And from here, again, you've got the option to go to the catalogue or to our research topics, Subjects A to Z. So if you do that, you'll come up with an alphabetical listing of all of the research topics that we've created for the State Archives collection, everything from immigration and shipping to land to convicts to Norfolk Island. So if you clicked on N for Norfolk Island, you would see this screen here. And you can see we have a guide for records that we hold to do with Norfolk Island, and then a link to our special bundles index for the years 1794 to 1813. For Norfolk Island records, I would also check C for Colonial Secretary and L for land, for example. So if you clicked on the Norfolk Island guide, you'll be taken to a page that looks a little bit like this. And so as you can see, we've got a little bit of a historical overview there on the left. And if you scroll further down the page, you'll see links and information about the different kinds of records that we hold in the collection that can help you search for Norfolk Island material. I just want to do a special shout out for the Colonial Secretary's papers because these are really important, especially for the first and the second settlement, and also for the third, but mainly the first and the second. So with the Norfolk Island Guide, there's links to the index to the papers relating to Norfolk Island, 1794 to 1813. And this is an index by name, and then we'll also take you to details about where those names can be found in that particular group of records. Another index that's really good is the Colonial Secretary's Papers, 1788 to 1825. This is a very old index of ours, created during the bicentenary, and we have recently been fortunate enough to be able to upload digital copies of every record listed in that index into our catalogue. And so there's a lot of different search options there for searching this index through the catalogue, also as a standalone index. And if you're familiar with the older format of it, you can still search that index that way too. A third index that's very useful is the Colonial Secretary's Letters Received, 1826 to 1896. So this index indexes letters. It started off as a convict index, but then grew to just really include all sorts of people in New South Wales. Not a complete index, but it's a very, very handy and informative, and you can search by the name of an individual or Norfolk Island, for example, with that one. You can search all three of the indexes as standalone indexes through Subjects A to Z, or you can go to our catalogue, search for the term Norfolk Island, and then use the options on the right-hand side of the screen in the catalogue to filter your searches down to a particular index, such as one of these that are listed here, or to record series. And we'll just take a look at that now. So if you did a search for Norfolk Island in our catalogue, you'd come up with results looking a little bit like this. On the right-hand side, you can see the heading Tweak My Results, and this is a way to filter your search. So you could filter to only those things that are digitally available. You could filter to a particular series or to a government agency or a sub-item or an item, whatever you think. So for an example, if we just filter to glass negatives, we can see there's 88 of those there. We cut out everything else and all we'll see is those 88 glass negatives there. And you can scroll through and view those. And you could actually narrow your search a little bit further if you knew particularly whether you're looking for a view or a coastline or government house or whatever, or you could just browse those 88 images all the way through. So what do we want you to take away from today? I think just a few things. Firstly, that we hold records from the 3 periods of settlement of the island, and that these are really records created by the New South Wales state government, and prior to that, the colonial government of New South Wales. I think they're surprisingly detailed, and they can tell you a lot about the way that the island was run, but also the lives of the people who lived there. And you never know what's going to pop up, as is the case for Francis McManus or Holman Christian's exam paper, for example. Who knew? So it's always worth going to have a look. Find out about the records using our website, so MHNSW, and if you /collections, that will take you to the collections homepage. And from there, you can view a few things online, but also come and visit us in our reading room at Kingswood at 161 O'Connell Street, Kingswood near Penrith, to see the records as they originally were created. And so I'm just going to leave you today with this image of the Melanesian girls at Norfolk. Again, unfortunately, we don't have a date for this image, but looking at the clothes there, I guess we put it close to the turn of the century. And what a wonderful and beautiful image to finish with. So thank you for your time, and I hope you have a lot of fun looking at these records, because I certainly did. Goodbye.